fireside chat Q&A coming up on a cannabis culture for all. Ted Chung, Tiffany Chin, Mira Gonzalez, Kai Henry. All right, without further ado, I'm gonna pass it along to them. Let's give them a round of applause. Woo!
Hey, what's up, guys? We are here to talk about what we do at Mary Jane. Mary Jane is a media and creative agency kind of in the midst of cannabis culture going mainstream. And it was started about 2 years ago with myself, some of our business partners, and the leading cultural influencers in the space, including Wiz Khalifa, Snoop, and Seth Rogen, just to name a few. We do everything from the largest cannabis music festival in the world, which is called the Wellness Retreat, to television shows such as Martha and Snoop's Potluck Dinner Party, which is Emmy nominated, and a lot of work creatively for cannabis brands around the world. But at the impetus of everything that we've done has been focus on diversity and maintaining sort of the forefront of representation in that space. So I asked some of our crew and associates to join us from the team, both Tiffany, Tiffany works a lot on our products and licensing and brands. Mira is our managing editor of Mary Jane, and Yoni, not Kai, Yoni is a good friend and also works at Mary Jane as a director of business and creative development. And so I thought it'd be good to have sort of a roundtable sort of discussion about how diversity is impacted the cannabis industry. What are the things that we have to pay attention to, and where is this going moving forward, and why this is like a critical issue for all of us. And sometimes a personal narrative is the best way to open the doors for this discussion. So when I went to, I'm from Los Angeles, but I went to university in Philadelphia. LA is a very multicultural place. I had friends from all different sorts of backgrounds growing up. And in Philadelphia, it's a lot more segregated at the time. And it made my personal relationships challenging, where I was a pretty social butterfly when I was in Los Angeles. And while being there, I found that if I was trying to meet someone to date or of a personal relationship, then there would often be some issues that I would encounter. So what I realized was that this group where I went to school, this community, as it was segregated, had not really seen an Asian American on screen or visually in front of them as a hypersexualized person. And in order to bridge that gap, I found a movie on VHS which was called Dragon: The Bruce Lee Story, which is at the time perhaps the only film that showcased a lot of sensual and sexual scenes between a white woman and an Asian man. And I started to play that when I used to have these dates where I used to strike out. And as I played that tape, I started noticing that my batting average got quite high. And I played that tape probably 1,000 times when I was in college. But it really struck a chord for me that it's very important that we have a chance to see ourselves in front of us when it comes to media and representation. And that really started the journey of, and the impetus of saying, I would like to see more people like the people that I know around me on camera in media, and in marketing in general when you're helping convey the message of brands. Fast forward that journey, and about 7 years ago, I've been working with Snoop for about 20 years, when we decided to, really go hard into the cannabis space, as he is obviously perhaps one of the most well-recognized figures in the space. When it came to media and the business of cannabis, we realized there was a tremendous opportunity here as it's happening at this time and in this space with this climate to potentially create an atmosphere and be in the forefront and champion an opportunity for diverse groups from all sorts of walks of life, gender, culture, sexually, whatever it might be, to have a place and a space in an industry that's being built right in front of us. And so that remains a consistent theme in our message. It's by no mistake or design. It is by design that you have our cooking show, which is Snoop and Martha, who obviously live on various ends of the spectrum that you would normally expect, making food, bringing people together, all under the kind of clever, mainstream, friendly humor of the cannabis lifestyle, etc. So I will take it from here by asking this wonderful panel some questions. And I guess I'll start, if we can go down the line, and feel free to jump in whenever you'd like to. But what was your entree into the cannabis space? How did you get into the business?
I'll start. Yeah, I'm Tiffany Chin, and I work really closely with Snoop on all of his branded products. And I would say the first foray into cannabis, I smoked my first joint in college. I think most people in high school and college, that's when they first get into cannabis personally. As I kind of grew the affinity towards the plant the next 5-10 years, I started working in the entertainment space and doing brand deals for specific artists, right? Snoop was among them, as well as some other folks in our management roster. But then as, in 2012, 2013, when the announcement came out that Colorado and Washington were going to go legal recreationally, it just seemed like a perfect time for us to kind of coalesce as a group and make sure that we kind of jump into this business in a safe, calculated way, but to do so in a big way, right? So that's how we came about with Leased by Snoop and a couple other brands that we have. And that's basically how I got into it. It was a gradual kind of move from entertainment into cannabis. I know others might come into cannabis through like science and technology and biology and chemistry. Others may come through it just in terms of growing and horticulture. Mine was kind of more through the business aspect.
I'm Mira Gonzalez. Whoa, loud, huh? I'm Mira Gonzalez. I am a writer, first and foremost. I've published a couple of books. And the way that I came into the cannabis space specifically was, well, I grew up in Venice Beach, so, that'll do it. But other than that, I worked as a bud tender for 2 years. And that is really how I got into the industry side of cannabis. Obviously, I've loved the plant for a long time. I've smoked the plant for a long time. I've appreciated the plant for a long time. But I think this job at Mary Jane specifically is something that combined my two main skills, which is knowing a lot about weed and writing. And so that's kind of how I ended up in this position.
My name is Yoni Hagos. I got started in the cannabis business a little differently than I think most people here. I'm from the fashion and nightlife space. My brother and I owned, or continue to own, a fashion brand that was really big in the music festival and nightclub scene. And cannabis was obviously a part of that culture. And as our brand grew and legalization happened, we have a personal relationship with Ted, and we always kind of talked about doing something together. And as the Mary Jane thing grew, it kind of made sense for us to kind of hop on and help build this business with them, focusing on a lot of the fashion, nightlife, event-based activations around cannabis.
Great. So thanks for sharing those stories and how you got involved. I think that, you know, the piece that's really important as a media company is that doing events like this and sort of demonstrating that, you know, we live what we preach is really important, because hopefully for anyone in the audience here can take a look at what we represent as a group and see that there's various entry points into the business. Just curiously, because I don't know who does what in the room, how many people are already in the industry? Oh, so everybody, and except for one person over here. Are you a curious observer? Are you learning? You trying to get in the space? Great. And how many people are on the cultivation side of the business? Retail side. So a lot of retail. What other categories of individuals am I missing? Software, technology,
Lab.
market processing, research. So I think that what's amazing about this business is that every day there are new entry points and opportunities that are evolving everywhere, from managing and being able to inform someone on strategy and legal regulatory landscape to everything that's changing in our landscapes on retail, especially for those of us in California, and all the nuances and challenges and exciting moments that come with that. But because this is just growing in front of us and the path has yet to be fully written, it's certainly a place where we can change the landscape and mindscape of who actually has ownership in this space. I don't think we'll see another evolution and opportunity like that for another 20 years. That being said, what I'd like to ask the panel, I shared a pretty personal story about my own history and culture, but I'd love to hear from the group, you know, what are some of the things that, from who you are, whether it be gender-driven, culturally driven, how has that given you a unique insight or opportunity in the space?
Well, I'll start. So, I mean, I grew up with a family that was very politically aware, very far left, a family that really hated cops and cared a lot about, you know, the little guy, minorities, caring a lot about, you know, not voting for Republicans and such. And so I think that, you know, cannabis inherently is a social justice issue. And I think that inherently it is, you know, something that minorities have not benefited from and now have a chance to benefit from. And that's something that's very important to me, especially on the labor side of the cannabis industry. So I think, you know, I obviously do editing, you know, and journalism is important and whatnot, but I do think that the part of the cannabis industry that interests me most is the labor side, like you were saying, Ted. I think that we are now in the midst of an industry that is just beginning, and I think that basically every other industry in America does not value its workers. It values, you know, the higher ups more than it values the people who are actually creating the product. And I would like to, you know, work hard to make sure that the people who are doing labor in the space specifically are the ones who are receiving the credit and receiving the compensation that they deserve. And so that's really like where my heart is in the industry specifically. And I think that like my tendency to feel that way and to care about labor issues specifically is something that really lends itself well to the cannabis industry.
So I am Chinese by heritage. I was born and raised in the United States, but when I was 10, my dad's company actually moved him to Beijing. So I lived there for 8 years until I came back to the United States for university. And again, I didn't really get into weed until, or you know, cannabis or smoking or consumption until later on in my college years. And when I was in high school, I definitely thought it was like a bad thing. You know, at our senior year in high school, when the jazz kids went over there and smoked their doobie, I was like, oh, that's not good. But now, like, obviously, you know, I've come to understand what it means, and what it can do for society. I know that you were there at my earlier panel, but one of the questions they asked me was, what are you most excited and looking forward to in this space? And my answer was, I'm excited for my parents to get into the space. Because eventually, I'm gonna assume they got some hip issues, some knee issues, some things that some CBD or THC rubs would definitely help them with. They're stressed out all the time, even though they're semi-retired, so I'm sure taking a hit here and there really help them mellow out. But in all honesty, when they heard that I was working in entertainment, they were like, okay, traditionally that's not what we would want you to be. We'd want you to be a lawyer or a doctor or maybe an engineer. Everything else is not cool. And I was like, well, this is what I'm gonna do. And they're like, okay, we get it. And then after I told them, 6 years ago I'm gonna start moving into cannabis, they were like, well, okay, this is a little bit extra. And then I sent them articles about, how it's helping with kids with epilepsy, a lot of people who have cancer and get over their pain or their inability to eat or inability to fall asleep. And after the inundation of articles and, little stories here and there, they truly came around. They still haven't asked me yet if I consume, because I think they're afraid to know the answer.
Don't let her fool you. She can consume the most out of all of us. She really is looking forward to some quality dabbing after this.
I think for me, I'm from Eritrea. We moved to America when I was in high school, and so my dad had a very successful business in Eritrea. When we moved to America, he kind of lost everything, and he had to go to college all over again because the American system didn't accept his degree from Ethiopia. So I'm very passionate. My dad built another business, and he's very successful, so I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship, owning your own thoughts, your own ideas, your own work. To your point, Ted, I think that this is the only industry that I can see in the next 50 years where, who owns what is not going to be dictated by what happened in this country 400 years ago or 300 years ago or 19th Amendment or whatever's going on with black rights, women's rights, gay rights. Like, this is kind of a clean slate, or as much as we can get a clean slate. And so the opportunities to own things in this space will be based the most on meritocracy, and that's something that I'm very passionate about, which is like owning my own stuff, whatever it is. And I think in this space, it's a chance for all of us, black, brown, gay, straight, whatever, to own your own whatever it is.
Well, that's so interesting, because my next question is, how does your experience in this industry compare to your work and experience and how you've been treated in other industries?
I mean, so before I was in fashion, I was a lawyer, and I was a lawyer for 8 years. I did corporate finance, venture capital finance in New York and Tokyo. Just the way I look, right? Like, I can let my hair down, literally. But I think that when you come into a traditional industry like law or transportation or engineering or medicine or whatever it is that most of us came from, there are already a perceived set of things, right? How you should look, how you talk, how long it takes to make partner, how long it takes to be a resident, right? Like, in a hospital, right? Like, to be a lawyer, the barrier to entry is law school plus passing the bar. To be a doctor, the barrier to entry is medical school plus passing your MCATs plus a residency, right? To be whatever, an accountant, you have to take, you have to pass your accounting exam, your CPA exam, right? But in this industry, there are none, right? Like, if you have a dope brand, you can own your brand. If you have a special way to grow, or you understand horticulture, or you understand packaging, or you understand brand development or marketing or research or numbers or whatever other thing that you can understand in the space, you don't have to go through these preconceived barriers, which are, invariably designed to keep the people who have having more. And so that's the thing that I'm very passionate about, is that this allows people to just kind of float without bouncing off walls that force them to go a certain direction.
So it was funny, Mira and I were just talking about this. So she has a younger sister who's about to graduate from MIT and go into finance. And
Just graduated.
yeah. And before she even told me what she looked like, I knew what she looked like. She has beautiful hair, she's conventionally attractive, and she works in the
Blonde.
finance industry. And then I was describing my sister, who's in the real estate industry, who is exactly what you would imagine as well, very buttoned up. It's got that pasted on realtor face on her card. But in this industry, you can look like whatever you want to look like. you can be buttoned up, you can wear whatever you want, you can do your hair however you like, and you'll still be accepted in enough ways that you can maneuver in the space. I will say that occasionally I do a lot of due diligence in grow ops for whether or not we want to do certain partnerships. And the amount of surprise I get when I show up is, I would say like 95% of the time, the growers are surprised to see a young Asian woman being the one doing the due diligence for the fertigation systems and the lighting systems and the automation for what you're doing with your actual grow mediums or any of those things, the trimming, everything. And once I open my mouth, they're like, oh, I get it, okay, yeah. So.
I mean, I think, unfortunately, we do still live in a world in which women can tend to be looked at as not belonging in certain roles, or can tend to be looked at as, not being an expert about certain things the way that men are automatically assumed to be. And I think I do see that in the cannabis space. I think that does happen, and I think that it would definitely be a lie to say that it doesn't. But at the same time, I come from a publishing, writing background, and I come from that background because I love reading and I love writing. It's like the main thing that I do with my life. And, going into publishing, I was really excited. I was like, great, I get to work for a big publishing house. This is my passion. And arriving there, it was, I must say, a bit disappointing in that, I didn't get to feel like I was being my whole self in that situation. It was a situation where I had to wear certain things, I wasn't allowed to say certain things, I wasn't allowed to admit certain things, and in the cannabis space, I felt the opposite. I felt in office situations or dispensary situations or anything like that, you do, like you were saying, have a wide variety of people. If you want to be buttoned up, if you want to wear a suit, you can do that. If you want to dress the way that I'm dressed, you can do that. It's allowed. And if you use cannabis as medication and you're able to work as you use cannabis as medication, that's not unacceptable. That's something that you can do. And specifically that, not having to hide the fact that I use weed in a way that, is helpful for me and helps me be more productive. The fact that you don't have to hide that, I think, is huge, and I think that just lends itself to other personality elements and just elements of being a person that because it's such a new industry, you can kind of carve out a space for yourself no matter who you are. And I would love to see that not go away for a really long time.
That's great. So I think Mira, I want to ask you another question, which is social justice, right? And things that we can do better in the industry, right? So, for example, diversity in the ownership space of like licenses in Colorado is actually pretty abysmal, less than 5%. And social justice is a huge issue. We cover it all the time at Mary Jane. Snoop's product line, leased by Snoop, has a corporate social responsibility initiative, which Tiffany is behind, that provides funding for legal resources for unfairly and nonviolent cannabis crime offenders. So I want to start there with social justice because you brought it up before, but like that's one thing, and maybe I'd like to ask each of you about, things that we could do better.
Well, so like I mentioned, I first started in the cannabis space working at a dispensary, and I do think that, like there is with any industry, there's levels of different types of careers that you can have. You could be a CEO, you could be an editor, you could be a budtender, you could be a trimmer. And I think that, in this industry, I see it happen just because it happens all over America, where, the people who are valued most in a company are the people who are at the top of the company giving orders. And those people are vitally important to a company. We need those people, but they're just as vitally important to any company as the trimmers and the people at the very bottom, the people who are creating the product. And so, I do see that the higher up positions in the cannabis industry do tend to be dominated by men. I would love to see that changed, first of all. I would love to see some women not just starting small companies or, working underneath a man at a big company, but being in charge of the big company, being the CEOs of the massive corporations. But, I do think that that's something that can't be left up to the individual. I think that the individual only has so much power, and that, you know, if you hate your job, you can't really just be like, fuck it, I'm gonna go, if you like have kids to feed, you know? Like, there's only so much that you can really do to change the system as one person. And so I think that in order to make this industry be fair and, you know, accepting in a way that other industries haven't been, the change needs to come from the top down. And I think that comes from policy reform. And I think that specifically the policy reform that we need is policy reform that insists that minorities are included in the cannabis industry, and specifically minorities who have been formerly incarcerated, or minorities whose lives have been ruined because they, you know, used marijuana before it was acceptable and before people realized that they could make money from it. And I think that, you know, most importantly, first and foremost, what we need to do is be sure that legislation is coming from the top down, that is forcing people who are in the positions to be hiring people to hire these minorities and to hire formerly incarcerated people specifically, because there's many people out there with nonviolent felonies for drug-related crimes, and that's unfair. That's mass incarceration, and we need to be, as an industry, working as hard as we can against that. And so I think minority inclusion needs to come from legislation specifically, and that's really the main thing that I would change, is that I think that, you know, lawmakers need to put a bigger focus on inclusion.
Thank you.
I think to that point, the city of LA is releasing a new set of licenses that are social justice licenses, right? Where either 50% or more of the business has to be owned by a minority, or, you know, somebody who's been formerly incarcerated for a nonviolent drug offense has to own 33% of the license. But what's happening is old white guys with money are buying up these people as fronts for the licenses, and then, you know, in an operating agreement or some sort of contract are essentially really owning the company. So while I think you're right, I think, to me, entrepreneurship is the way around all this, right? If we all own the stuff, then we don't need policymakers, and we don't need to rely on other people to do the right thing. We do the right thing because it's our stuff. So I am very passionate about, like, supporting entrepreneurs, supporting people who have good ideas, helping them learn how to trademark or incorporate or whatever basic kind of legal thing that's the barrier to them starting their thing, which is usually something very simple and very cheap, but obviously, you know, lawyers charge a lot for it. So that's my main focus. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that's my main focus as an attorney, is to help in that kind of way, to make sure that we're not reliant on, you know, Congress or the state to do the right thing, which they've never done. So.
And just to touch on what you're saying, I completely agree. I think you're absolutely right. And I think that, you know, in a lot of situations, we really can't trust Congress or any of the lawmakers to do what is in our best interest as citizens. You know, and I think part of the solution to that is to, you know, work very hard to not only vote for, but to campaign for people who are going to be, you know, creating top-down reform that actually benefits us as people. And, you know, I do think that it's a very positive thing about the cannabis industry right now that it can be a true meritocracy in a sense, because, you know, it's so brand new that people are looking for new ideas, new entrepreneurs every second, and those people are getting picked up based on talent. At the same time, personally, fundamentally, I believe that even people who are unskilled, people who you know, aren't entrepreneurs, people who don't have good ideas, I think those people deserve to live in dignity. And I think that those people deserve a space in the cannabis industry specifically. You know, I think that there are spaces for people who are not natural entrepreneurs or not natural leaders. And I think that those people, you know, deserve a role that's just as important as somebody who is, you know. So I would just add that onto what you're saying.
Agreed. Good point.
So, Tiff, I'll ask you, you know, from a woman's standpoint, what do you think we could do better?
This was also touched on earlier today in the women-focused panel, but I think it was just interesting because I personally have never experienced this, just because I've never had to do it, but I'm pretty sure Mira has, because she has been a bud tender. But there is this, like, subjugation and objectification of women in not only, like, advertising and, like, you know, when High Times came out first, it was just kind of like a Playboy weed, right? There's just like ladies naked with cannabis around their parts, and it was definitely kind of like a very vice-focused publication, as opposed to maybe informative or educational or talking about reform or social justice. And I think like women in particular need to be able to understand that they don't need to do certain things to keep their jobs. They don't need to dress a certain way to show their value. And again, I'm not saying just specifically in retail locations, but in conventions, like I'm very happy to see next door that there's very few, at least in the one sweep that I went through, but there's not any like scantily clad ladies trying to lure you into their booths, right? It's actually content, and it's like focused on their products and their actual services and goods, and informing you on what they do as opposed to trying to catch your eye. I feel like in a lot of cases that I've slowly been hearing more of is that these women who are working in these, not conditions, that sounds too negative. They still have jobs and they're working in retail shops, but a retail shop needs to be around 68 degrees. And for most women, that's kind of cold, especially if you're wearing very little clothing. And so they may not be able to tell their boss that they want to dress a certain way. I was just talking about this to someone else about the Hooters, the Hooters issue, right? Like a lot of people sued them because men sued them too because they weren't being accepted or being allowed to be employed by them, and so Hooters won. So you can tell that our system doesn't really protect individuals as opposed to like the corporations or the groups that are making the hiring decisions. I just thought that juxtaposition, and they're not even in an industry like ours. They're in a long-standing industry of restaurants and food and service. So if we can't do it right in an industry that's already been in such longevity and such growth, and it's a stable now economy and industry in the world, how can we do it with cannabis? I don't know. It's just my personal.
No, thank you. So I think that the other thing to think about is also, this was to open up the thought process, and we're very passionate about discussing about the power of diversity. And this goes for all different types of groups and where you come from and your uniqueness and how that can actually be a value set. This group has turned, and Mary Jane specifically, as the leading and fastest growing cannabis media and creative platform, has really excelled off of that philosophy, and recognizing that your difference can actually help segment the marketplace and give you a place of ownership, like Yoni said, that others may not have insight into, is a really powerful proposition right now at what is still somewhat the starting line. So just know that there's an incredible opportunity, no matter what you look like or where you come from or what your conditions are, that there is a space to own in this industry. And that's what we wanted to share with everybody in how we represent ourselves, how our partners represent themselves and their brands. We also wanted to make the announcement that, helmed by Tiffany and Mira, that Mary Jane is starting a quarterly workshop program both here and in Canada called The Janes. And it is open to various groups, not specific to any gender, but you need to start somewhere, and it's focused on women's issues, opportunities, and foresight in the cannabis space. That will be a combination of lawyers, brand owners, and marketers that will be sharing the experience. And if people have questions and women entrepreneurs want to learn about it, or even male entrepreneurs want to learn about how they can participate and support the space, invest in the space, look at the category, look at the new product opportunities that haven't completely been involved for the female audience. So that's one way we're contributing back to what we identify as a need to discuss and an opportunity. I think what I'll do is, we are an intimate group in this room. Leave this to maybe some Q&A if anyone has any questions or would like to ask us about anything in our world or the topics we've discussed today. I think this gentleman's going to get a microphone over to you so we can hear you.
What's
your
first
name,
of all,
bro?
Brian Williams.
Brian, how?
Yeah. First of all, what's your main company that you primarily put most of your focus on at the moment?
I think that Mary Jane is at the nucleus of everything because the team that is part of the media and creative agency not only has a marketing platform and an incredible reach to brand products and retail stores, but the creative agency does a lot internally to formulate the brands that we're well associated with.
Just long term, where do you see Mary Jane being in 15, 20 years as you vision it?
Well, I think we'll be a multi-billion-dollar media platform and company, and I don't say that. We see this happening in our business in other spaces, and we have a 2-year strategy that'll take us to that place, and we look at it from a global perspective. We know the percentage of the market that we own, even domestically, and if we can exponentially grow that, not even exponentially, if we can pro rata grow that into different legal global territories, we'll have that real estate.
We're going to open a Mary Jane on Mars, so just FYI.
I have a request to make. I'd like to hear Mr. Chung do a freestyle.
Who is that back there?
Kave.
Oh, shit. This guy went to college with me. So that ain't gonna happen this time. That also costs $1 billion. So when you can afford that, Kave, come back.
So just so you know, he's one of the best freestylers I've ever heard in my life. Just so you know. So harass him later.
That allows me to speak well at conventions.
Hello, thank you very much for sharing all your thoughts. My name is Sarita Evans. This is Carlos, and we're just starting a testing lab up in Davis. And I got a chance to meet Tiffany earlier, and I'm really glad to hear that you're going to have this women's group, or whoever wants to come, I guess, but mainly focus on the women's group. Now, is this going to be in person? Is it going to be like online, or how is it going to,
Yeah,
how can you participate?
We will stream it online,
Okay.
but it will be locally based as a starting point in Toronto and in Los Angeles, hosted at our law firms, our partners' law firms.
Oh, okay.
So
I have to go down to LA and.
Yeah, like I
We'll
said,
give you the link so you can stream it.
you can stream it, right, and,
All right.
and learn from there.
Okay.
But it's pretty much an open door policy. If you'd like to come down to LA, please join us.
Thank you. Hi, how you guys doing? I have a question about Sesh. I don't know if y'all have seen recently what's going down with Instagram and its cannabis policies, according to a bunch of people in the cannabis space who've been getting shut down because of their content, even though it's just flowers and hash, really. What do y'all see Sesh kind of taking a step in that direction to be a platform to share both information and, of course, awesome pictures of cannabis? But do you see it like taking off through Mary Jane or through a separate space itself, almost like Instagram and then getting acquired by Facebook? Do you kind of make that separation, saying like it's not a part of Mary Jane, to then get people involved in Mary Jane?
That's amazing. You've done your research. What's your entry point into this space?
In cannabis?
Yeah.
Or
what's your back? What do you do?
I currently help run a dispensary or co-manage a dispensary out in Boulder, Colorado, Fresh Baked. But myself, I went to uni at University of Colorado and went to the journalism school there and smoked a lot of good weed. And eventually, I ended up saying, "This is the rest of my life. I just want to, make hash, sell hash, get people happy and healthy." And essentially, what y'all have done, it's essentially what I wanted to do and wanted to be involved in. It's everything between the journalistic aspect of it, the social justice aspect of it, and really connecting people who want to be in the cannabis space. So that's just my background from it.
Interesting. So Sesh is an app that we released early on and it's like essentially like a beta that we've just had out there available on the App Store because we foresaw this issue coming up, right? So we've been testing it, and without really heavily marketing it, just seeing the organic community that'll build around it, you'll see in the next year, I would even say sooner than that, a big push into sesh being a alternative for what is a unknown landscape with Facebook and Instagram. You're right, we do see, we see profiles and channels that get, shut down for no reason. There's not really a reasonable answer sometimes or clarity as to why. And if other sort of more traditional media agencies are putting out cannabis content, then they're not flagged and they're not shut down. So again, I think back to Yoni's point, it's sort of like, why rely on their system, right? And create your own. And that's exactly what sesh is.
I just wanted to know what your guys' thoughts were on the growing need for cannabis consumption lounges, and if there are any approaches that you guys have planned for that.
Cannabis consumption allowances? Is that what you said?
Consumption lounge.
Consumption lounges. Bongo.
Yeah, they're coming pretty soon. West Hollywood has some applications that are that they have allowed people to submit for. The kind of consensus is that it might hit end of next year. I think that they shot that down in Canada with the initial October 17th launch, regulatory launch, but it looks like the issue is popping back up again, and some provinces are going to allow it, some might not. It's kind of a weird legal issue because even though the country of Canada is federally legal, a lot of the regulations are kind of city by city, province by province, municipality by municipality. So they're kind of waiting on the first one to jump. Nevada also has allowed consumption lounge applications to be submitted. We actually submitted one with one of our partners in Nevada, but a bunch of big guys are getting the space. TGI Fridays has submitted applications. So like it's coming in like the casual restaurant kind of space. What's gonna end up happening, I think, in my opinion, is that when it gets legal, more places and people are smoking outside and in the street, right? The city's just gonna get sick of people smoking in the street, and they're gonna allow for, consumption lounges to open up. But it's gonna have to be like one of those things where like we're all just in the street smoking, and people are like, we're sick of it, so go inside.
We've also heard that it might be limited to the type of form factor. So whether it might be smoking, right, or vaping, but it could be limited to just infused beverages.
And some municipalities are allowing for that to be joined with a beer and wine license too. So they're going to create, a bar kind of setup with it, similar to the alcohol kind of restrictions.
Okay, it's me again. So I wanted to also talk about, this, Yoni was talking about how, we should own it. And I think there's a lot of minorities, women, and, that really want to just own it. And, you can change all the regulations you want, but you still need money. And that's a big hurdle for a lot of minority, minority companies. It's just getting started. We're told to go to family and friends, and, I know my family, and I know a lot of my friends don't have that kind of money to, really. So it's creating, trying to create a new vehicle that we can get funded to get started. And that's been, I think, a big challenge, for us. And we're working through it, and we've been sticking to it, and we've, able to get open. But it is a big challenge, and I know I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and that's one of their biggest, hurdles that they have to get over. So any kind of thoughts that you might have on that piece of it, it's not just being able to get the license, it's being able to get the money to open up the business. So any thoughts?
I mean, I think for me that inherently exists in our society, right? Like, if you want somebody to invest in your company, they want to see 3 years of financials, they want to see your tax returns, they want to see your license, they want to see your corporate documents, they want to do all this due diligence, right? Like, and I think that those are just kind of barriers set up to kind of funnel pre-approved people into a lane to get money easy, right? So once we have the money and we own the spaces, then your circle of friends and family that that might not have money to invest today, the way this industry is going, in 6 months, in a year, in 18 months, they will have that money. To a more micro point, I think a lot of minority entrepreneurs that I know that have interest in getting into cannabis or any other business really, I think are intimidated by some of the process that comes around starting a business, right? Forming an LLC, getting an EIN, opening an official bank account, getting a state license, getting your DB, whatever it is, right? And I think that we all need to be better about supporting each other and things like that, right? So if you need any legal help, come get my card. At the end of this, I'm happy to work on whatever you need for free. But we need to be better about collaborating on these things, because a lot of the things that I'm good at might be hard for you, and the things that you're good at are hard for me. But because we have a team here, we're kind of going well because we have a good team. So we should be a team to each other.
I also want to just add to that, and I agree with everything you said, and I want to add public banking. Public banking, I think, is vitally important for the cannabis industry at this point. People who run cannabis businesses cannot go to normal banks legally. They will not touch their money, and I think that that's a huge problem, and I think it's especially a huge problem when private institutions are the ones that are in charge of deciding whether or not you deserve to get a loan for your business. I think that's not okay, and I think that, if we had public banking, then it would be the sort of thing where it would be regulated by a government, and again, not that I necessarily trust the government as a whole, but at least then cannabis businesses would have a place to go where they would be guaranteed a loan under certain circumstances, versus a bank can be very ephemeral and confusing in terms of whether or not you're able to get a loan.
I would agree with something that Yoni said about, I think that more than 50% of the barrier is actually the fear of what you said, getting the license, making the jump, calling your insurance guy, your accountant, your lawyer to help you set all this stuff up, and really actually pulling that trigger. I think that is more of a barrier than the actual, yes, for sure, actually garnering and raising capital is definitely an issue. But, I had a friend who wanted to start her own edibles business, and she actually started in her own kitchen and created her own edibles, figured out her own way of dosing, and bought all the raw materials in a smaller scale. And then as soon as other individuals started eating her stuff and realizing that this tastes so good, I can't even taste the weed in here, she blew up, and she started, and she's not huge, but she's running her own business now. And so that was the way that she got the word out through friends and family, but not by trying to get money from them, but by giving them little, try this out and let me know what you think. And then after a year or two, she was raising a little bit of money, and they were willing to jump in for $5,000 here, $2,000 here or there. And it really helped her start up her business.
I would also say that this comes back to why right now is important to have this discussion, because someone who might traditionally have more background financially, as far as financial history and 3 years of performance and so forth, and have a head start, I should say, based on just the history of this country, you're the opportunities are at a much more equilibrium right now, right? As far as right now. So if you have a great idea for your testing lab and you're looking to raise money, and another person does, then it's really just based on the quality of what you can provide and your pricing and your efficiencies and all these things that you might be incredible at. And the next person, even though they might have traditional access to capital and so forth, what you can add to this industry and what you can own has a lot more value in this industry right now. As far as raising capital is concerned, we've had to do it, many times across our various businesses, and I will say that even 7 years ago, when we started this journey, and started that process, you want to talk about having a tough time raising money. I mean, we have other companies that do very well, but the taboo was still at large, and the public sentiment and public reporting on the success and the potential market cap of these businesses and companies that have now gone public, and this is all public record, right? The sentiment is completely pivoted in the other direction, and the pendulum has swung. And so right now is the best time to not be afraid to approach venture capital companies that are in this space, reach out to them, send them your docs and your decks, because people are investing in this space. And we're starting to see traditional capital come into the marketplace in a unprecedented way. So I do think if you get, that's a whole nother discussion. I don't think that has to do with, well, it does to some extent, but I don't think it's restrictive from a female standpoint, a minority standpoint, LGBTQ standpoint, whatever it might be. Learning how to raise money, that's a skill set, right? And if that's key to your business, I would try to learn about that as much as possible. And part of that's just going out and knocking on doors, sending out emails, and getting the word out about what you do, because people are looking to spend money in the space. They have capital and they need to invest.
I would also just add to that, I think that's all absolutely correct, and I think we've been talking a lot about the personal responsibility to put yourself out there to be able to get these funds, and I think that is vitally important, but I just also want to flag that there is an even bigger responsibility to the people who are already at the top to make an extra effort to be including these minorities specifically, the way that you are with Mary Jane, and I think the other companies are too, but I think even more so, people need to be making an extra effort to be including women, minorities, LGBTQ, and giving them money, giving them investments, giving them space, because those really people are the gatekeepers of the space, and without their permission, people are going to have a really hard time entering it.
I would say one more thing, ma'am. If you have a business license, you're 99% ahead of everybody else in this space. If you have a bank account, you're 99% ahead of everybody else in the space. If you have a permit, if you have a bank account, if you have one product, if you've made one sale, if you've done anything that's semi-legit, you're way ahead of everybody else in the space. So don't get, obviously be focused on the structure stuff, but don't get caught up on it. This space is moving so fast that it's really, I think, ideas and product that is the most important stuff. Obviously, get the business stuff right, but it is, nobody in this space has their stuff together. There's very few people who do, and so I think that's not something to demotivate you. It should motivate you that, we got baby steps going and we're moving in the right direction because everybody else is kind of over here and doesn't have it together. Okay, good.
Hi, my name's Leanne Maury. I wanted to know, how long did it actually take you to become profitable in the cannabis space? And then starting that up, were you taking funds from your other companies to, do a little startup, or was it out of pocket? Like everyone kind of, the professionals, everyone kind of had their lane and you guys just grew from there?
So, without getting into too much confidential information, but to give you a path that hopefully can be educational and informative, is we gathered a group of like-minded investors that were willing to put in, not a huge amount, but a reasonable amount each as primary investors in what we were about to do in the space. So, there's Branded Products, which is its own entity. There's Mary Jane, which is the media and creative agency. And then there's a VC fund called Casa Verde Capital. And I was not joking when I said that we took that, we had a business model, we had projections, we try to be as conservative as possible. There are other businesses our groups have that are outside of the cannabis space, and we've done that very well for a long time. So we understand the reality of what it is to be a startup and go through those motions and to have realistic goals. And that means setting budgets. It means making sure that you're motivating the team to do whatever it is that creates you revenue. And because we are very thoughtful of that, the businesses were profitable within a year. right? But to grow and to keep up with this industry and to scale and to win the long-term race, you have to have more people, more resources, and you have to stay ahead of the curve at all times, especially when you've gotten now to where we have. Now our competitors are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That takes more scale. So that's what I was saying we are raising for outside of the initial investment and the seed. We are out there like trying to raise much larger tranches of capital. And it wasn't, I wouldn't say, especially years ago, it wasn't that long ago, but even like 5 years ago, 4 years ago, you'd have to really search high and low to find investors who are comfortable. It was mostly private wealth. And that's not something that, that was a big piece of what I had to helm. And I don't come from raising money. Like, that's not my professional background. My professional background is we have other companies, but they've always cash flowed themselves and grown on their own. This industry is moving so fast that at a certain point, when you reach a tipping moment, you have to start to go raise bigger capital. But now, there's so many options. So I would say in the past 2 years, raising capital has been a completely different experience than it was 3-4 years ago, right? There's everything from public markets, there's international, federally legal territories that have institutions that will invest in the space. And you just gotta, honestly, all of those relationships for me and this team and all our various companies in cannabis started with a cold call. It all starts with a cold call. People don't do that these days. And I literally mean a call, not an email, right? Like you send the email, you call them, you let them know what you do, you try to look, it's not that complicated. Just look online and look at their company profile and see who's there and put a call in. 90% of the time, 99% of the time, you're not gonna hear back. That's the same case for us. But it's that 1% time, if you just keep going at it, you will connect with someone who will connect you with someone. And if you have a good idea and a good concept, it's out there. The capital is out there. It's way easier now than it was for us in the beginning and for everybody in this room, right? And you just got to make the effort. Tiff alluded to it. Half of the things that make you a successful entrepreneur is not being scared to pick up the phone. I don't know why people don't do that anymore. And you'll find champions along the way that will help you connect to other opportunities and scale your business. Okay, well, thank you, Yoni, Mira, Tiffany. Thanks everyone for joining. Hopefully this is a good start, and don't forget about the Jane. Spread the word. It's our women-driven workshop.